Welcome to Lifespan Psychology. In this course, we're going to be studying human development going all the way from infancy through old age. And we're going to look at how people grow and change as they go through these various periods of life. We're going to look at how people change physically and cognitively, and how they change in their personality, and also how they change socially as they mature. Today I'm going to start off talking about Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 is a very condensed version of a lot of material. First of all, it covers general theories, and those theories we're going to be covering in more detail in later chapters also. I'm not going to be talking about that today. Also in Chapter 1, there is an overview of research methods. Also, there's an overview of genetics. Then it talks about prenatal development, and finally birth. I told you it covers a lot in Chapter 1. Today I'm primarily going to talk a little bit about research methods and also a little bit about genetics. All right, when it comes to research methods, all sciences use basically the same methods, the same way of gathering information, the same way of analyzing our results, the same way to avoid bias, and so on. A couple of kinds of research methods that you see commonly in lifespan psychology are longitudinal studies and cross-sectional studies. With longitudinal studies, you take one group of individuals and you study them over a long period of time. The longest longitudinal study I know of was of Terman's study of gifted children. That study actually went on for over 75 years. They followed these children throughout adolescence and all the stages of adulthood. And they found that, in fact, they grew up to be academically successful, and they got pretty high-paying jobs in general. And in addition to that, they said they were happy and generally well-adjusted. So that's a famous longitudinal study. A cross-sectional study, on the other hand, you'd see more commonly, because as you see, longitudinal studies just take so long to get your results, and also, you could lose your subjects, they move away, they quit, whatnot. A cross-sectional study is where you take individuals of different ages and you test them all at once. And so you can see you get your results immediately, you can publish immediately. The problem, though, with the cross-sectional study is that this type of study implies that when this group of young people get to be middle-aged, they are going to act and think like those people do now. And in fact, if you think about it, when you get to be your parents' age, do you think that you're going to be like them? In some ways, you probably will develop some of their loving qualities, but in other ways, you're going to be very different because you grew up in a different generation with different experiences. And so that can be a drawback. And I've seen that as a drawback. For example, they'll take a group of 30-year-olds and a group of 70-year-olds, and they'll test them on various cognitive functioning. And they find that in most regards, these 70-year-olds are not doing as well in many areas of cognitive abilities as the 30-year-olds. And so based upon that, then they will look at the 30-year-olds and say, it looks like as you get older, you're going to be losing it. Well, in fact, that's not really a fair study, because what we're really comparing is apples and oranges. These 70-year-olds didn't have as much educational opportunity as the 30-year-olds. And also, they probably didn't learn as advanced material when they were in school as young people do today. In addition to that, if you think about it, the kinds of jobs they had in adulthood, they were homemakers, they worked in the farm fields, they worked in factories. Today, people work in information technology and communication and very different kinds of jobs. In addition to that, when you're testing 70-year-olds, and you're testing them on math, I mean, how long ago was it that they were in school? And you're asking them about the Pythagorean theorem, good luck. And so to say to these 30-year-olds, when you get to be 70, you are going to act and think like they do, just wouldn't be true. I know that they're going to be somewhere when they get to be 70, but it's not going to be there. The good news about 70-year-olds, though, is that even with their educational disadvantages, fully 1/3 of them score higher on an average IQ test than the average 30-year-old. So they're certainly not all senile and doddering. Many of them are actually really advanced in their cognitive abilities in old age. Okay, so that's a couple of kinds of research studies. There are others as well, like correlational studies and real experimental designs. Sometimes some of the things we want to study, we can't go out and test directly. Let's say we're interested in the effects of alcohol on fetuses. Well, we're not going to bring in 150 pregnant women and say, okay, we'd like for you to drink so many ounces of vodka per day, and let's see what happens. Clearly, we can't do that. So we'll have to do a correlational study. We'll look after the babies are born, and we'll see which ones have features that might be of concern, and then we'll go back and talk to their mothers about their lifestyle and see if we can see any relationships among certain lifestyle choices and certain aspects of what happens to infants after they're born. And so some studies we do that way. Other studies we can go out and test directly. We'll try out a new drug for hyperactivity, we'll try out a new therapy or a new teaching technique or something, and that we will test directly. Okay, so that's a little bit about research methods. As I said, this chapter covers so much different kinds of material. I thought I might also mention a little bit about genetics. And in this chapter, they talk about the fact that in the center of any cell in your body, other than a sperm cell or an egg cell, any other cell in your body, if you were to look in the nucleus of that cell, you would see that the nucleus contains 46 chromosomes that are in 23 pairs. 22 of those pairs are called autosomes, and the 23rd pair is our sex chromosomes. If you're a female, your sex chromosomes are X and X, and if you're a male, your sex chromosomes are X and Y. Located within those chromosomes are genes, and genes are composed of DNA molecules, deoxyribonucleic acid molecules. And so, anyway, if I were talking about genes just for a minute, some genes that we inherit are what we call dominant genes, and those genes are the ones that are more powerful and tend to take over, like darker hair or darker eyes or that sort of thing. Recessive genes are the ones that are less powerful, and so in order to inherit a recessive trait, you need to get that recessive gene both from your mother and your father. You have to have two of them in order to develop that trait, such as blue eyes. Could two brown-eyed parents give birth to a blue-eyed child? Absolutely. If they're carrying that recessive gene, that hidden recessive gene, if each parent is carrying that gene and they each give it to the child, absolutely. Could two blue-eyed parents give birth to a dark brown-eyed child? Absolutely not, because all they carry is blue-eyed genes. And so I don't care if they have 20 kids, every one of them will be blue-eyed. And so it's fun to look it up and look at all kinds of genetic traits and recessive and dominant and see which ones you have, and that's always interesting. And so in addition to that, we could look at genetic disorders. And some genetic disorders, matter of fact, most genetic disorders, thank goodness, are recessive. And so if we get a disorder gene from one of our parents, chances are our other parent will give us a dominant, normal, healthy gene that will override it. And so even though we have the gene in our genotype, we won't have the disorder. A few of those recessive genes, though, if you get one from each of your parent, you end up with the disorder. And a few of those genetic disorders might be things like sickle cell anemia, that's more common among the African American population, or Tay-Sachs, a very sad disorder more common among Jewish population. It seems like every population has their own things, you know, it never fails. Okay, and so there are a number of different kinds of genetic disorders. Some of them are recessive, some are dominant, like Huntington's. If you get even one gene for that, you end up with the disorder. And by the way, they can test for that to see if you did inherit that gene. Would you want to know that? That's a disorder that's sort of like Alzheimer's, but you get it at a younger age. I'm not sure if I'd want to know. That's an individual decision. There are other disorders that are called chromosome disorders, and that's when the entire chromosome, either there's too many of them or too few of them. One very common known chromosomal disorder is Down syndrome, or sometimes it's known as trisomy 21. And that's a disorder where on the 21st chromosome, instead of getting two of them, you get three. And then you end up with that disorder. And I think many of us are familiar with that disorder. Quite a few people have it. If the mother is a little older, you know, in late 30s or 40s, she's more likely to have a child with Down syndrome and with those special characteristic eye fold and some other facial features that you might notice. And it does carry along with it a higher chance of having some, at least mild mental retardation along with it. Okay, so look through the various genetic and chromosomal disorders in your book and read through the rest of that chapter as well. And I think that's all for right now for Chapter 1. Okay, thanks.